Okay, let's try. Okay, let's try. Sweet. Okay, let's try. Sweet. Okay, let's try. Sweet. Okay, my name's Nate. I am, well, to be specific, I am not actually a communist per se. My name's Nate. I do hold some communistic beliefs, but in the terms of nationalism, more or less. The term I would prefer to be called would be National Bolshevik. And to top that off, I also own a channel called Nazbol Commandant D20, where at the moment I'm just mostly wanting to do reviews of tabletop RPGs and sometimes let off the odd sentiment of political discourse in the 21st century. Awesome. Well, it didn't necessarily turn like sway me on that. I mean, like I've always had some like form of rational beliefs of, well, to be honest, I would say somewhat centrism, but minus the pandering BS that most centrists does. Whilst I have economically left views, I'm somewhat rather conservative in social stance, but I choose not to be a bit of a arse hat over it. Okay. Yeah, I do understand where you're going with this, and I'm going to say before the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, which is a prime example at least. At the time, beforehand, well, after, sorry, dickhead moment, because after having taken over from the Tsar and Russia becoming like the Soviet Republic state, Lenin, because there was like about 7 years of war communism, and after the 7 years of war communism, Lenin started seeing some a bit of problems within the USSR as a whole after establishing communism. Now, I know I'm supposed to be defending it, and I mean, I will, but he noticed that there has been some altercations with crop and production, and he feels like, you know, ironically, it's not going to waver in his favor. So obviously he came about with the you know, the new economic plan of 1922, where obviously it's more of a temporary setback which does uphold some capitalistic elements, but for the time before 1930, I mean, like, they were building up for the time, and after it was abolished in 1930, they wanted to actually go the full Marxist ideal. And that's when Stalin came about after Lenin's death. But he, fuck, man, I'm a bit, sorry. And he decided to go along with the 5-year plan and go full-blown Marxist, like, government. Authoritarian, yeah, but he went what Marxism is supposed to be. Because you see most of these, because you're in the same ANCOM versus ANCAP group, right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I look into it, and these people are talking about abolishing, like, monetary value. I mean, like, money is just a piece of paper that's just, you know, poofed out of thin air, and it really actually holds no real value. So it's just generally a glorified debt. And then, that being said, it just goes on to the point it will focus more on, like, as you said earlier, about production and resources. Yeah, I mean, like, the earth is full of it, but the earth wasn't with farms and like factories before then. So, like, you know, you got your fossil fuels, you've got your energy, you've got your food, you've got your clothes, all from natural living resources and animals. And I feel like, I mean, like, we still manage to maintain these resources, but however, I think due to having some form of capital, I mean, like, we still get them now less, but it starts to hype up some sort of inflation.
Yeah, and I agree money doesn't really have any objective value, but that's kind of the point, is if someone thinks it has a value, then it essentially it has functional value, in the sense that if someone's willing to trade for it, then it's apparently valuable. And yeah, okay, my mic's working now, good. Yeah, how about you comment on that?
Well, as you did say, it does have like some form of objective value, because as you said, you just exchange for goods, yada yada yada, because it does have some like quotations. Like, have you ever seen the money over here in the UK?
Yeah,
because, like, before the whole change from paper to becoming somewhat plastic, there's always a little quotation saying, "I hereby promise promise whoever the sum of £10, £5." You get the idea. It's just weird that nowadays, with money being hype, like, just seem to have objective value and mostly rates and exchange. It's more or less more, like I say, it's just really more or less glorified debt, as I said beforehand.
Well, is there any real problem with debt? I think we can get kind of towards debt and profits. I'm mostly interested in the ethics of these systems. That's where I start, and then I analyze what the efficiency is. But if it's efficient and unethical, I think maybe you're getting into like Nazi territory. So we don't want to go there. So, like, what would be your objection to debt?
Well, my objection to debt is not to do with morality, because I don't want to sound like I'm doubling down and being a basic bitch. It's the fact is, like, after World War Two, we had many unions. Obviously, got United Nations, the European Union, and it all seems to want to coincide with like monetary value. However, it just seems like ever since, like I said, after World War Two, most fucking hell, it seems that more or less that that most countries, you know, have usually tend to bail out each other. Like England, mostly sending foreign aid to either the European Union or Pakistan. With that, it kind of like racks up in debt, because most of the time they have to like go for big bailouts, and with them big bailouts there are certain consequences.
Yeah, and I'm not a huge fan of big states or states at all, but what about on like the individual level? So if I agree to give you work or product of my work today, and you pay me tomorrow or over the next week or month or whatever, is there something wrong with that arrangement, or is it just going to go out of control, like you were saying at the international level?
You might need to sort out your mic. I'm having it's kind of sounding a bit distant.
Oh, how's that? Any better?
Yes, better. Could you rephrase? Could you repeat or rephrase the question again?
Yeah. What about on like the individual level, where if I simply agree to do work for you today, and then you agree to defer your payment, and that form of debt, is there a problem with that in and of itself, or is it more of a problem that it will get out of control at like the international scale?
Well, I would say if we was to look on it in terms of mutualism, it would be probable. But with most companies nowadays, especially with big CEOs, I mean, I could, let's say I was to have a, sorry about that. Thank you. Like I say, I am a CEO, and I own a rice packing facility where obviously, you know, we pack rice. I think I would like to be more or less fair on advantages for my worker, for the worker or the proletarian, to have not only a means of sufficient living, but also, you know, as we say, to reward, like at least reward them at least with like the usage of their like time, fucking hell, usage of their time and hours spent. I mean, like that would be me in my position, but with most of them, they don't really tend to play ball. I mean, like, I'm more than happy to want people to work, and I'm more than happy for people to want to earn a like basic income that is, you know, reasonable enough.
So, but how could you ensure that though, without having some kind of central authority?
Well, I didn't really think that far. I don't know if I can really do it without central authority. I mean, like,
well, because what changed my mind was I was pretty much kind of an authoritarian communist. I didn't really realize much of the difference. And I started understanding more about anarchy and being against authoritarianism, and I started realizing, well, I wanted to force my politics on other people, and I started drifting more towards like anarchist communism, and then I got fully into the anarchist stuff, and then I was like, wait, I'm a capitalist, because to me, the capitalism is. I know you said you're not an anarchist, but I kind of just equate anarchy with freedom, and to me, capitalism is more in line with freedom just because it's more about individuals interacting and consenting to each other at the individual level. And I do still consider myself left-wing because I'm more interested in how to kind of resist corrupt powers and institutions, but I also am not a fan of collectivism or interfering with people's decisions at the same time.
Well, I'm not going to. I'm not going to like judge you for that. I mean, like everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I'm not going to disagree. I mean, like when I see these anarcho-communists, and this is going to be a bit of a shock. They are someone I don't identify with. I mean, like, I have very extreme views, being somewhat conservative. Well, because when I said earlier in my introductions, I support National Bolshevism, is because I want to maintain the sense of being of my own nationality, whilst being economically left. And with National Bolshevism, it's just what people would just, lazily call it, Nazi communism, as if, both of them didn't like really contradict each other.
Well, what is the contradiction? Because as I understand it, the Nazi economy was pretty liberal. I mean, it had universal health care. They were trying to get rid of landlord abuses and.
Well, the thing is, with National Bolshevism, it's not actually communism per se. However, with that, the term was actually coined by Stalin because he referred to as socialism under one country. And with that, because where I'm going to come with the capitalist part is, you said earlier that capitalism is all about individual freedom, yes?
Oh, yeah.
Well, I wouldn't disagree. I would actually say that's right way of putting it, but with most neoliberal governments, and this also includes Democrats and reformists, they manage to they more or less want to keep hold of the whole ideal of their policies, but however they can't necessarily stop and just change everything, because nowadays everything in the 21st century is pretty much revolved around money, subsidiaries, and stocks. However, the only thing I'm going to have to disagree with capitalism, that it ironically has some consequences, and this is where the nationalist in me actually will speak out.
Personally, I see these failures in capitalism and these trends as more of caused by policies and wastefulness enacted by the state. So, like inflation, for example, that's purely, I mean, not purely, but pretty massively the influence of the Fed and how they loan money to the government. I think that relationship is fundamentally corrupt and fraudulent.
That's one thing I will actually agree with you on. I mean, I'm going to take an example, neoliberalism in the United Kingdom. At the moment, we're under the guidance of the Party of Conservatives, and now when you hear the word conservatives, you pretty much mean someone who wants to uphold conservative values like God, the state, and obviously family. But nowadays, they seem to care more for their own goals than rather the will of the people. I know you're going to probably say, like communism would pretty much fall under that sort of same category, and to some degree, that statement would be right. But with neoliberalism, it's fundamentally international, and this is where once again going to have to bring out the consequences of late stage capitalism in modern society under neoliberalism. With capitalism, you see a lot of these ANCOMs always talking about this whole racist phase, but then again you've got to take into consideration that also capitalism doesn't have generally that ideal, but it also kind of has a sense of virtue and tolerance, and I have seen it mostly on mostly media. Now people always say cultural Marxism is taking over. No. Cultural Marxism, Marx has never ever wrote a book nor said anything about culture, and that's where I kind of have to laugh at the right on this, because once again his ideal was more on the lines of collectivism, not culture.
Well, I think I agree Marx did not talk about that specifically, but the point of cultural Marxism is not to say that he talked about that, but kind of talking about collectivist values instilled by Marx in terms of culture. And so it seems now that, especially with these Twitter mobs, that we're now collectivizing these decisions about cultural things. And so that's where the term comes from, is my understanding.
Yeah, because like when I see stuff like, have you seen the latest Star Wars films lately?
Yes.
I'm not personally a fan. I'm more of a Warhammer 40k type of guy.
Oh yeah.
But a lot when I see mostly these neckbeards and right wingers saying that when the stormtrooper Finn just came out of nowhere, Finn was black, and they said, "Oh no, it was cultural Marxism," and I'm like thinking, no, it's not cultural Marxism, because once again, Marx has never wrote about culture. So it's more or less the fact is with with most big movie companies like Disney, Hollywood, they all operate under that like capitalistic ethos where they can literally pay whatever to anyone who performs in a certain role to just for their own monetary gain. And the thing is, it kind of annoys me to see. I'm not going to bring it's racist into it, because that is a kind of a weak argument, wouldn't you think?
What is specifically?
You just saying a bunch of neckbeards and right wingers complaining about a black stormtrooper being race and calling it racist, and I said, racism. When people use that word so many times, it's kind of a weak argument.
Yeah. Well, there were, like, when it first came out, the first images, I heard stories about, Nazis being like, oh, you can't have a black stormtrooper. But I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I'm very disappointed in the new Disney films. Mostly what we talk about is disappointing about Finn in specifically is his lack of character and motivation, and not so much his skin, well, not at all his skin color, but the fact that he was a wasted opportunity of a character, because he had that great moment at the beginning where he defected, and then 5 minutes later he's murdering his own fellow troopers that he defected because he saw one dying. And so his character makes no sense, and he doesn't seem to have a place in the story, and he's just kind of a goofball. And so that's the current criticism of the Star Wars films. And I guess unless you're really into it, then you might only hear about kind of the Nazi stuff that the media is picking up on.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's got to the point where, like I said, this is where the capitalistic ethos, just pops about. Like, at the end of the day, capitalism isn't any wing of the sort. You and I both know it's economics, and with that, pretty much capitalism can pander to literally anyone, as you said, because it's based on itself on the idea of individualism, not the collective.
Well, I mean, if anything's an argument against capitalism, it's these new Star Wars movies and the shitty movies that they just pump out of Hollywood all the time. But I think part of that is intellectual property, which I disagree with at some level, because anyone's allowed to make a Sherlock Holmes story, and you can have fair competition in that market. And there are a lot of successful Sherlock Holmes series going on right now simultaneously. But if someone held the patent to that, they could block someone legally for trying to do the same thing and compete in the same market. And yet we can do that with Star Wars. And that's why I think it's shitty now, because it's become monopolized.
Exactly. And because where I said, when I said earlier that these ANCOMs talk about capitalism being this evil, racist, homophobic, yada yada yada, I also see it as a term of as I said, something on the lines of a virtue and tolerance. Now, my only gripe with that being said, with capitalism, is not because it's economic and it does cause people some problems to a degree. It's the fact is it comes with the consequences that most governments get a big bailout from banks, yada yada yada, and then they can decide what to do with their economy and country. Now, this may be a bit of a shock of surprise. There's this party in Great Britain called the Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninism. Now, we've recently had Brexit almost 3 years ago, and as you know, we all voted Leave. I voted Leave as well. Hey, someone said Nazbol Gang assemble.
Oh, yeah, I just saw that too.
Yeah, I voted Leave because I will be honest. With the European Union, it's a globalized what they call democracy. But the thing is, it's also pandering to international capitalism and corporatism, which enforces a lot of rules from us, and most of us don't really like that idea. The issue with the European Union is that it's the liberal hegemony decides what we can or cannot do. And with Brexit taking place, we had to decide what we want. Do we want to keep being in this, in this government accepting hands out, but however, unironically paying just to fucking stay in it, or do we continue on our own way and start bringing out more jobs? Kind of sad thing about that. I was watching a debate about it before the whole thing took place. This fella was said his father used to own a fishing company before the European Union was called the European Union. It was called something else. I remember my dad saying what it was. I cannot remember for the sake of it. And this fella was saying like his father used to own like the fishing trade, and he used to like mostly do fishing in the North Sea. But due to the European Union, they banned anyone fishing in the North Sea and decided to catch the fish themselves and sell it and import it to us for double the price. When I'm like thinking, and this is where I'm going to see it from a Marxist-Leninist viewpoint, we should collectively, you know, somewhat fuck. Sorry, I'm a bit stuttery.
No, you're fine.
Thanks, man. What we should do is somewhat collectivize our industries and sell them for a price that isn't steep as imports, because there's many there's borough markets in London that every Friday sells fresh food, and you'll see like live lobsters and crabs for sales that goes on for like 30 to 40 quid, which is rather fucking steep for crustaceans.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with us taking back our not taking back our country, because that's a bit of a neo-Nazi thing to say, but we need to take back some of our laws and start being our own our own entrepreneurs, sellers, and all that. And that's one way to look about it, because I think we need our own natural resources and materials being sold in our homelands rather than have it imported.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not full anarchist, really. I'm kind of a fence sitter in that way, because I believe in nationalism in the sense of the existence of nations. I don't think we should have one world government. I think there's just saying one world government can, you know, give you chills, but I think different cultures should have some kind of border, maybe not a physical enforced border like we have today, but I think that different groups of people have the right to collectively negotiate price controls and to kind of maintain the state of their culture. And I struggle with that because I also believe in freedom of movement and freedom of choice. And so at some point, you do have to say, well, is the collective going to get their way, or do you get to do what you want with consenting adults? I think there's a way to kind of mesh the two, but the current way we have things set up, I think we still need borders and nations for sure.
Well, as I mentioned previously, probably like 10 minutes ago, there is a certain way to mesh both of those ideals together. However, it would actually piss off a lot of Marxists on the way. But to be honest, it actually kind of makes sense. I mean, I do enjoy reading the manifesto, But however, there are certain inconsistencies about what Marx wrote, and I mean, like, I do like the idea of publicly owning factories, but at some time we got to take into consideration: can we become our own bosses rather than, you know, the ones working the cogwheel whilst the big dude with the top hat sits on his golden throne.
Well, that is one problem of, like, some people are more qualified than others, but then what I more jump to is, like, if everything's collectivized, then you need to go to like probably a group of people for permission for every clever idea you have. And so instead of a world where you can just go convince people to either give you money or use your own savings to get private control over, whatever you're producing, you have to go and ask other people permission for that funding. And if that group doesn't like you, you're shit out of luck. You can't go to anyone else. You can't go to private citizens to raise funds. You can't use your own funds. That's kind of one of the major problems I have with that kind of system.
Yeah, you might want to sort out the mic again.
Okay. Is it echoing?
Yeah, it was echoing, and I'm having trouble with what you were saying. I'm like, I could pick up some parts, but I couldn't hear much of it.
Yeah, there's a couple spots in this room that aren't too good. I was just saying my main concern with not allowing private ownership is that every time you have an idea, instead of going to other people or your own savings, then you would only have one avenue and one group of people to look to. And if they don't like your idea, then you can't bring your idea to market. Whereas if you have private ownership, you could go to anyone you wanted and ask them to invest. You could use your own savings. You could work up and just use that savings. You could go to one of many competing investment bodies. But if you just have one, communist authority, is there even going to be multiple groups that you can ask, or is the one decision going to be final?
Well, if we're going to point this out, I think there was a party in Russia back in the 90s, led by Edward Limonov and Alexander Dugin, who called themselves the National Bolshevik Party, which was outlawed back in 2008 due to Putin's takeover. Well, Putin's always been leader, but he's kind of mostly saw these parties as illegal and just wanted to throw them out the window. But with their idea of National Bolshevism, private ownership isn't necessarily bad. I mean, like, I actually somewhat agreed with the concept of, like, most enterprises and small businesses needed to be ordered to be protected. And I think this is where Lenin's new economic policy actually comes to fruition, because when he wrote up the NEP, he decided that he wanted to, like, make some private ownership legitimate, as long as the wealthy, or the kulak as he calls them, doesn't abuse it. And because before Stalin came about, fucking most of the kulaks get fucking gulagged, which is a kind of bit of a sad understate, which is kind of a bit of a sad undertone, but it just happens.
Well, so yeah, I thought you were kind of more on the ANCOM end.
ANCOM?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I would never. I hate to say this, but I would never side with those crayon eaters.
Okay.
Never.
So what do you think about like Antifa? Are they acting like fascists?
Well, um, well, about 5 years ago, I was associated with the alt right, and like I know that they were pretty much. We know what the alt right is all about, but to some degree, if I look past their like really borderline extreme right wing views, I do feel some sympathy to their cause. But I don't think white nationalism is the answer. But we do need some form of nationalism to maintain maintain order in our country. I mean, like we can't necessarily be 100% complete liberal. And then with Antifa, I was also associated with them during my teens, and I kind of understood their ideals and what they must do, but their views on what's fascism is kind of rather skewed. I mean, like in all fairness, all these stuff like Proud Boys, I wouldn't necessarily call them fascism. As far as anything, they unironically support the state of Israel. So I see them more as Zionist shills than anything else.
I mean, there's the people who call like cops fascist, which, you know, I've probably said that too, but it's kind of a relativistic argument. I mean, a police state, people are going to call it fascist, but it's not technically correct. So I think when Antifa is calling people fascist, it's definitely watering down the word, because they're just as fascist as, you know, the regular statist.
Well, I would disagree with them calling them a fascist. For starters, they're not even remotely fascist. The only difference between them and actual fascist is fascism actually had a legitimate spot in history. Antifa, give it a few years or so, they will probably throw themselves into irrelevancy.
And what do you think about the alt-right? Because I think your kind of trajectory is very interesting, from kind of an alt-right orbiting to National Bolshevism. Because as far as I understand it, the alt-right are actually socialists, in the vein of National Socialists.
Well, to some degree,
they're just obsessed with race for some reason.
Well, the whole race thing, doesn't really interest me. So
yeah, I don't get why they think it's so important. Like, I get that they think it's connected to like, the Western culture and higher IQ, and but if that's really the metric, then they should be removing low IQ white people and importing high IQ black people or whatever, you know?
Well, the thing is, and I've seen this a lot with the alt-right, they claim to have a lot of ties to European culture. I mean, like through hereditary genes, yes, that would be true. But the thing is, these alt-righters who claim to be European, they're not one of us. I mean, like their ancestors left their country over the years, and they left their own countries to form America. You know, many things happen, and nowadays it's like I'm not actually British. I have an accent. I was actually born in Malta, but I've lived in England most of my time, and I now live in Wales. The thing is, I can't necessarily call them Europeans because, as I said, their ancestors left the land to become, you know, was it part of America and the whole some sort of new order. And to me, and don't take this personally, but Americans are outcasts.
Yeah, I get that impression. So I think that we've had some discussions about rent on Facebook. Does that sound familiar at all?
I don't recall.
So what is your position that rent is exploitative?
I'm sorry, what?
Is it your position that rent or rent seeking is exploitative in like a negative sense?
Well, in terms on something on the lines of rent, it's something I am not really for. But however, I'm not with a landlord. I'm with a association. So they operate more on the lines of collectivism rather than individualism. Rent, I think it's normal. I think because I remember joining this Polish communist group on Facebook a while back, and I can't read Polish, but I've got it translated and understood what they stand for. I mean, like their ideas is just like, yeah, it's okay to want to work, but it's also okay to have a place of your own. I'm like, if you rent, it's not really you adhering to private ownership. I mean, like, it's still somewhat private ownership via the association or landlord.
So I'm kind of like I'd almost say I'm like a capitalist communist.
Capcom.
Yeah, because I think it's a great idea to have this group that will redistribute wealth and provide for people. But I think that should be a private entity like a charity. So I think the best way to do communism is within capitalism and within private ownership. And so I struggle talking to these people about rent, I guess, a lot because it's like where does the entitlement to a building come from? And do you have two Facebook profiles? Because I could swear that I've talked to another guy with your name about this.
Probably, but
oh yeah, because you said you kept getting zucked.
Yeah, because I usually you kept getting the zuck.
Okay.
Because when I say stuff, I say anything that's not friendly, like at all.
All right. Well, so do you believe that there is an entitlement to a home?
Well, there has always been entitlements to home. This is where I'm going to bring this up, and this will probably piss off anyone who is watching this. The fact is, everyone does have an entitled to home, because like at the end of the day, you need somewhere to maintain base for yourself and well-being. There's a lot of problems with that over here, because we live under the ideals of neoliberalism. We have influx of well, not really influx, but it's more immigrants who come over, and they like some of them who come over, they do work and they work, and so be it. That's actually good. But there's some that don't really work, and they get it somewhat offered on a plate. And there's a lot of people on people of said cities that are struggling to find a place of their own, and they've got no one to turn to. I mean, like, they look towards, for charity in order to survive. And it's kind of sad that, these neoliberals would rather focus on those who are not hegemonous to that society, rather than fixate on their own. And that's where the legitimate criticism of capitalism comes in. Like I say, we can say it can be bad, but it also can be virtuous and tolerant. But sometimes it focuses more on saying, fuck these guys, let's help these guys instead. And the homeless are the only ones that are left out and betrayed by this. And it's kind of sad that they have to, sleep on the street where it does get cold at nights, it rains, it snows. And I just feel that it doesn't help the situation of the homeless. I'm like, there's a socialist MP that died many years ago called Tony Benn. Ever heard of him?
It sounds familiar.
Tony Benn was a Labour MP who wanted to. Well, he was more of a reformist, and I'm very indifferent to reformists, but he held some like socialist ideals that he wants to help people, then rather leave them on the street to their own suffering. And because he says these people are victims of something on the lines of marginalized markets, because you see a person living on the street, sleeping in a box, where what can they do to order to survive? Not most of them can work in order to get place. Like I say, they have to solely rely on charity.
Well, but part of that is like the government will require, for example, 1,000 hours of training for being a hairstylist. Whereas with less regulation, a homeless person, I mean, you can just kind of walk up to people and ask for work, but you could even offer to cut their hair. But if they get caught, again, the law is designed to fuck you as hard as possible.
Yeah.
And once poor people are in the system, they're in that vicious cycle forever. But my cousin actually worked to build homeless shelters in Denver, and she was saying they just didn't show up. There were plenty of shelters, and they just didn't come. Like, I know a lot of them actually choose that lifestyle, who are of sound mind, but a lot of them are mentally ill, and they don't use the shelters a lot either. So it's kind of a hard situation, because we actually have tried to improve their situation, but they're kind of on the streets for a reason. My girlfriend was homeless for a while, but that was by choice. She literally was just living the lifestyle, and she had a job the whole time too. So I think that's a really complicated issue, because I would love to help the people, but it seems like it doesn't happen. It doesn't work.
Well, I can remember 2000 around 2015. Me, my mate, my brother, and his girlfriend were walking back from Games Workshop after playing a huge ass game of 40k. We saw this homeless dude just sleeping underneath the canvas of under a door, and whilst we was walking past him, I saw these two women who obviously were high on some form of opiates or narcotics, was just looking around like this dude, and they just decided to take his bag. And I said to my brother and my friend, look after him. I'm going to chase them. Well, not necessarily chase them. And I pulled up on them, and I'm like, ladies, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, we're gonna take this, and I'm like, stop. And I'm like, just stop. You took that from someone who was sleeping and vulnerable. You aren't going to do anything good or intentional. And they tried to justify it. And I'm like, bullshit. You don't do that to someone who's fucking sleeping and bad on his luck. And like, it just then turned into a full blown fist fight. And I know this will probably, make a lot of, probably the Ancom Spurgs really spurg the fuck out on this, but I had to knock a bitch out. It had to come to that, and
sometimes you gotta knock a bitch out.
Oh, definitely. So I took this dude's bag and I gave it to him, and I sat down and spoke. We spoke to this homeless dude who was from, I believe it was he was from Chelsea in London. So we spoke to him and we asked him how come he's came all the way from Chelsea to Chatham, and he came here on the living with friends, but sadly something went wrong. And as you said, there's usually a reason why people are homeless. So I said to him, "Do you want to sleep on the bed for a couple of days?" And he was more than happy with that. I'm like, we helped this dude. We made sure the dude got a fucking shower because he fucking stank. And I also fed him, also helped him with his CV, and he managed to get a job in the end, which was actually quite impressive.
Wow.
So I mean, you're right about some people don't want the help, but there is some that do truly appreciate it. I mean, I haven't seen the dude for about 4 years, but I honestly hope he is well.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think those opportunities are there. Definitely not enough. But it's also I think that they are there. I think people are willing to help. Just as many people, shitty people who are just so willing to exploit weak people and just take from them. I think there's just as many who are willing to help and to stand up for the little guy. And I think anarchy worked in your situation. You saw some people stealing some shit. You took care of it.
Well, I don't think it was a anarchist issue. I think it was something on the lines of common sense. I mean, anarchism doesn't necessarily apply to having decent morals, at least. I mean,
well, I just say it because the state wasn't involved. So.
Oh yeah, fair enough. I mean, would you ever see, I know, Donald Trump pull up and say to this dude, "Yo, I want to help you"? I mean,
yeah, I don't know.
He has helped people in the past, but this was before when he was president.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure.
I don't think rich people would stay very rich if they were doing that for long.
Mm.
Although Bill Gates, he can't get rid of his money fast enough.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
I mean, in all fairness, I think to some degree, collectivism and charity do somewhat go hand in hand, as long as you manage to help that person overcome the daily struggle in some form of cold society. What also is kind of upsets me about the homeless is not against the homeless. It's, I know you're going to probably because this is where I will actually start bringing the supposed left wing into this. Now, have you ever heard of a philosopher from Slovenia called Slavoj Zizek?
Yeah.
He's a fucking brilliant dude. I will actually give him tops. I'm like, even if I was full blown right wing neo-Nazi, there is certain stuff he would say that I would actually agree with. This dude this dude does say things that actually make a lot of sense. Now, in his debate called Living in the End Times, where he watched a lot of videos and gave his 2 cents on it, he was watching a shot based in about Afghanistan, and he brought up that, you know, the left have this mindset that, you know, we should pull out, leave, and let's leave it at that. But he also pointed out that he doesn't necessarily like the left wing himself, considering he is a communist. And because he said they act so masochist in the terms of morality, and it's just getting to the point. You do see that a lot in most left wing, well, mostly Western left wing, because they have kind of somewhat developed this sense of like liberal identity that they claim to be against.
Yeah, and the power has kind of gone to their heads. And I think right now with the left wing is, you know, the liberal values became widespread and became the new Overton window, and now it's being used to bash the heads of whoever's not in line with the script.
I know, because this is actually something Marx actually brought up in chapter 1 in Manifesto, called Bourgeois and Proletarian. Now, you see most of these left wings always talking about, you know, collectivist values, but yet ironically they adhere to bourgeois values, which is something they should be morally against, but they're not. And you see them become part of what Marx wrote in a long essay called
the Champagne Liberals. You're talking
Champagne
about?
Social, no. He's referring to dictatorship between the proletarian dictatorship and the liberal dictatorship. And I see the modern day left wing adhering to what he claims liberal dictatorship. You know, you got your Hollywood, you got your Rockefellers don't count, but they still somewhat act in that. And also you got your and you also got your media. And with these ones in particular, they are kind of skewed their thoughts. They kind of obscure the thoughts with mindless drivel that just seems normalized to them. And this is where one thing, where I'm going to bring up Alexander Dugin, who of ex-National Bolshevik Party, now leader of the Eurasia Party. He points out that, you know, liberalism has became infected within the West for so long, where it has become to the point it's almost toxic, and liberal hegemony is the enemy of the world. That's why I somewhat would I'm not going to say I'm somewhat agree, but I agree to his eyes it must be destroyed.
Well, it's almost like they don't question anymore. It's just accepted as dogma, and so it isn't really a real position, but more of just a viral, like, set of positions, kind of. Like, no one really knows why they hold these positions. You just do it because everyone else does it at this point.
Yeah. This is it's like it's kind of like hierarchy.
Yeah. Because at first the competent rule, and then rule becomes a power or an attribute in itself, being in charge, and then all of a sudden you can give power to people who don't have any merit, and that's when it becomes corrupt and it all falls apart, and individuality no longer counts so much. And that's the job of the left, and I think the left has become that corrupt authority instead of resisting the corrupt authority, and so that's why the left is so insane right now, that it's breaking apart in all directions, because there's no merit anymore. There's
I know and it's also kind of sad that I somewhat associate with these people as well, because as I say, they are someone I do not identify with.
Well, I say I left the left, but I don't say I'm a right winger. I still say I'm on the left, but it's almost like there's no place for me there anymore.
Well, this is a thing. A friend of mine who is actually watching right now. Hi, Jason. And he said that the way that the left operate has come to the point that it's going to push away those who are legitimately left wing into something new, and we have seen it happen, and we've already seen it happen in France. I mean, like, the Yellow Vests are not necessarily like left wing. I mean, like, there's actually right wingers in it as well, but it's a form of
it's a huge coalition, I think.
Huh?
Isn't it a big coalition of lots of different kind of random philosophies?
This is acceleration.
Yeah.
This is something Alexander Dugin actually he didn't predict the Yellow Vests, but he actually predicted this sort of ideal in his book, Fourth Political Theory, which I would actually honestly would recommend you give a chance to read if you have time.
What was it again?
Fourth Political Theory.
Okay. Who's that by?
Alexander Dugin.
Oh, right. Cool. I wanted to go back a little bit to the issue of rent and homelessness. Okay. I don't think the issue so much is with the homeless, although I have complete sympathy for them. But I think kind of the communists more so are they're criticizing on the basis of people who have a house or a home, but they're breaking their backs to stay under that roof, because they're kind of critiquing why is the landlord allowed to withhold something and is essentially forcing this person to work and break their back to keep paying for this house. I think that's more what the communists are pissed off about. Does that sound right?
Well, I would say true, because there was an event in China that which involved with a lot of landlords being killed.
That was recently?
No, that was
or the Great Leap Forward?
During the 40s.
Yeah.
The thing is, these and this is going to make me sound condescending, but these communists, as they call them, they are just LARPers. I mean, like, at the end of the day, they have no idea what they want nowadays. It was more effective in, like, Eastern Europe, because at the time they had an ideal that they wished to follow. Most Western communists these days don't tend. With the exception of the British Marxist-Leninist Party, they just seem to want to revitalize and bring back the revolution like it means something to them. But the thing is, they will never understand, nor will they ever witness a revolution in their time. The only revolution that's happening now is the Yellow Vest movement in France. I know we've probably definitely strayed well away from the rent question, so I do apologize.
No, that's fine. I mean, I agree. I don't think they do know what they want either. I think it's more about hating the rich and revenge and grievance. And but like, why do you think that these violent revolutions are so common with that political philosophy?
Well, if I'm going to be specific on this, it once again we're going to have to go back to a essay written by Karl Marx called "The Proletarian Dictatorship and the Proletarian Dictatorship and the liberal dictatorship," because like neoliberalism is very very rich in ideology, where they want to continue whatever they must in order to survive for their own needs rather than the people. However, these ones who fetishize over like the violent revolution think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. And the sad thing is that France, once again bringing them up, is doing a better job, because at the end of the day, it's liberalism that is toxic and poisonous in a sense, to the point that it must be destroyed.
What do you mean by the toxic liberalism? Because I know a little bit about the Yellow Vests, but the American media will not report on it like at all. I haven't seen one story about it. All I know is from the internet.
Well, there was a lot of things that there's a lot of different sides to the whole toxic liberalism. Why the Yellow Vest is rising now? Some people believe it was something to do with the rise of petrol. I think that's only quarter true, but most of it, I think it's due to the fact that Macron has kind of given up all kind of ideals of sovereignty in France, and these people feel like France is not France, and with them being coincided with the European Union, it's becoming more of internationalism than anything else. Now, it's funny because communism is internationalism itself, but not in the sense of international collectivism. It's international capitalism, which kind of spreads around like a plague and gives out weird, wacky laws that every country within that union has to follow. You see it a lot with Germany. You see it a lot with Sweden, especially. And these people have given up their own sovereignty to, adhere to, like, one of the capitalist merits being virtue and tolerance. And I think I've said that way too many times.
Well, to me, liberalism is synonymous with like Enlightenment values, like human rights and private ownership. So, and what you're talking about, like the international capitalism, it seems like a fundamental contradiction to me, because it is these weird laws, like you said, these weird trade laws that are actually prohibiting people from practicing capitalism in certain areas. So I guess, what do you mean by liberalism?
Well, obviously with liberalism, people follow the ideals of virtue, tolerance, and most importantly, becoming one singularity, like the human race. Compare it to the Tyranids from 40K. They kind of somewhat act under a single synapse, and they must do what they can in order to feed and survive for their own gains rather than the from either the actual collectivists being the working class or the individualists being you respectively.
Well, it seems like you're more describing collectivism.
Well, it's
or like the
kind of like that,
extreme.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but it with a different face. Hence I compared it to the Tyranids from 40k. Single synapse,
like a total hive mind.
Yeah, you get the idea. I mean, like, and Antifa are no different. But then again, who legitimately gives a fuck about those retards?
See, as like coming from like the left, that seems more of like kind of a right wing position of like, well, these liberals just want everyone to, you know, worship the LGBTQ plus IQ whatever, you know.
I tend to avoid that. I tend to avoid it. I'm bisexual myself. I know which, and if Stalin was to hear me say that, I would probably get gulagged the fuck out of.
Yeah, we'd never hear from you again.
Press F, guys. Press F.
But yeah, that it sounds more like how I hear Republicans describe liberals, as they just want everyone to think alike.
Well, in some respect, because when I pointed out that you know, you got these Republicans, and also because most Republicans adhere to a sort of collectivist mindset as well, whether they want to actually like coincide with that term or not. It's like
definitely along the religious lines.
Oh, definitely, I would not disagree.
But there is something about, I don't know if it's the religious mindset or the economic conservative mindset that's just more individualist.
Well, economically, Republicans are somewhat, well, this also applies to the liberals as well. If they're going to be specific in economics, they would be somewhat individualist. But however, when it comes to culture or religion, then it becomes the whole hive mind. Okay, let's eat a whole fucking planet sort of ideal.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how the people who tend towards more religious collectivism are also tend toward more economic individualism. To me, that it's like, I feel like I almost have it figured out, but it's just kind of this weird thing that I'm interested in.
I honestly don't think anyone, including myself, would know what to say at this point. But in due time, someone will probably reveal the answer enough. But will it be the right answer? To quote a certain Norwegian, let's find out.
I mean, honestly, I see both collectivist and individualism on both sides, because, you know, with the left, they're more socially individualist, and the right is more economically individualist. And I think maybe part of that is just the divide and conquer tactics of our politicians. They want us to have these weird, like, stunted, staggered political opinions, so that they can just keep us separated in these two groups, so that either one or the other will always win. That's kind of what I feel like is moving towards.
Yeah.
But
I feel we have strayed too far. I think we've definitely strayed far away from the rent question.
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of meander wherever we want. But I think we can kind of start wrapping it up, unless you have anything you want to talk about left.
Actually, yes. Being being somewhat moderately left with the ideals of capitalism, where do you stand on immigration? I won't judge you on anything you say because, like I say, I'm not one of them Ankomsbergs.
I am kind of all around, because I kind of want the wall, but mostly just to have the argument done and over with. I think immigration control is necessary if you have a welfare state. My preference would be open borders, and I think people should have freedom of movement. But at the same time, I do recognize that we can't just have willy-nilly influx of people, especially in like a democracy, because if you import a bunch of people from like Guatemala or whatever, at some point their culture is going to vote more than the native people who have been there for decades, and those demographic changes can change the laws. And so to me, that's a destabilizing action. So if you're going to have nation states, you do need immigration. But I lean towards more porous borders, and I think that we should extend. I think we should pretty much be very loose with green cards and stuff. Over
here.
Yeah, well, a work visa or whatever. I think those should be given out pretty liberally, and mostly to just be able to keep track of the people who go in, so that they're not sneaking across. I want them to be able to work. I want them to be here, be able to come here if they want to. But I also think that they need to be kept track of, just because of the way the system works.
That's funny, because when you said that, it actually does remind me of an article written by, again, the Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninism. They was actually talking about wanting to maintain control of their borders. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, I actually have the same ideal as you. I'm morally not against immigrants, considering I am one myself. But respectively, onto them lines, I think we need to at least maintain some form of rationality with borders, because, as you said, we can't necessarily accept people willy-nilly, because the main concern argument for Marxist-Leninism in the terms of immigration, as written in the article by this party, that by having more people imported to the working class, most of them will be exploited for rather cheap, and some of it will kill off actual working class people who wouldn't be able to get a job, because most of these international companies that resides in Western countries want to more or less have cheap labor that would probably do the work effectively. And this is where I would have to somewhat agree with Trump. Fuck, I can't believe I had to say that as well. I'm not going to use the whole, people come in, they're rapists and shit, but it's more of the working class. However, there are certain within the welfare state with the immigrants coming in, and they just want to focus on getting handouts that should not be applicable to them. I remember there was an article in the USSR Constitution of 1936 where, well, it's not related to the immigration, but it does relate to those. It does relate to those who should be working, and if you don't work, you don't eat. And I think that sort of mindset should apply to the West. I'm not saying we should starve them. Oh hell no. I mean, that would just be fucking terrible. But what we should say is like, okay, you're here in this country. We see you have adept skills and you want to make yourself useful along with the proletarian. Okay, cool. Welcome aboard. And that's what we should have. And like, if you don't work, then you can't really you can't maintain a living. And where the welfare state has kind of let an influx of people who aren't necessarily homogenous to the country live under sort of a benefit system, and then you see most of these form in like small certain areas that form like ghettos, and it does cause mass problems and violence amongst each other and the natives. And that's where I think we do need to have some form of strict border control, not because I want to say, oi, you're from Poland, get the fuck out this country. No. In fact, my ex who lived with me is Polish. She works now, so congratulations, I suppose. I just don't think we need to keep having people coming to the country unchecked and not offering something for the lines of themselves and society or the nation itself.
Mm-hmm. And I do agree with the conservatives that at some point they could harm the economy by like inflating wages, but our net immigration, at least with Mexico, has been zero for a long time, and I think it's a little bit more now, but it's pretty much close to zero. And we need those workers. We use those workers. So I think the way it's set up right now is not efficient. It's both too loose and too tight at the same time.
Yeah, because also with these most of these I can understand with most of these people who work with in the fast food industry wanting, well, we don't have this issue because our currency is different. But with that being said, because like most of these people want something on the lines of not automation, but they want like $15 an hour, and I'm not saying I would agree with $15 an hour, because like under national Bolshevism, if it was a legitimate party nowadays, everybody would know that we wouldn't as even though collective we necessarily wouldn't get the same equal treatment, and that is a reality we have to come to accept. But that's where most of these workers who demand 15 hours are kind of getting replaced with automation. I'm like, I see a lot of I'm not saying automation has effectively have been affected in America as of I'm like, it's taking place, but I don't think we need to keep replacing people who have adept skills that would be useful in said environment and workplace. I think the fact is they need to kind of understand that their livelihood matters more than their own gain. I sympathize with them with wanting $15, but at the same time, they're going to get pushed out by automation, and that's the one thing that's going to probably benefit the capitalist system more, because with automation you don't have to literally pay jack shit to the robots.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other conversation we could have. I've got to get going now, but I think that's a good place to stop. Lots to think about, and let's talk soon again, and maybe host some other debaters. Try to get a series going here. So.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Do you know, I actually enjoy it. Do you know, actually, I would actually say thank you for actually being pretty reasonable, because I know a lot of other people like like the so-called communists wouldn't try to have. I wouldn't say I've been coherent in this conversation, but at the same time, I've been coherent, and we've been mutual and kind of respecting, and I'm glad we haven't kicked off calling each other racists or some dumb shit like that. Right, cool.
I think I lost connection for a second, but
Yeah, same, man.
all right. Well, thanks for coming on, and I will talk to you later.
Hopefully see you again.
Flat Earth.
Oh wait, were you here?
I think she said something about NASA.
Oh really? Wait, were you talking?
Yeah,